The cell phone actually is a huge success, almost without precedence in modern history of marketing. But the reason for that is that it was never tested for its long-term impact on health and the environment. In the beginning, it was assumed that the average person made a 6-minute phone call and had a very big head and weighed a lot. There was no testing ever. There has never been any testing for the impact on a child, and I'm going to show you soon why. There's no surveillance or random sampling in most countries, with the notable exception of France, for testing of phones to see what radiation they do emit. And many nations have more phones than adult populations. Many countries now. Many people have more than one number. And it's not just phones, it's wireless transmitting devices. Because as you'll see from some of the science I'm going to show you, those devices have biological effects, even when you can't feel them. And some people can feel them. Next slide. This is the standard that the FCC has used for 25 years, okay? That empty bowling ball of a head you see right there in the center, with that computerized machine that's controlled, goes into the head and comes out, goes into the head and comes out, in order to try to replicate the temperature change that can occur from having a phone next to the head. That phone isn't exactly next to the head like most people use it, because there's a space for the ear that could be as big as this. And understand something, that every millimeter away from the head, with the inverse square law to the, actually probably to the cube of the inverse, gives you less exposure. So every single millimeter. So if you allow this much exposure away from the head, you're allowing more radiation. These original limits never took into account the fact that pregnant women or young children would be playing with these things. And there are 10,000 apps now for babies and infants and toddlers. The standards never even asked about impacts on birds, bees, and trees, nor did it take into account the fact that there's synergistic effects, so that if you have exposure to a toxic chemical, which of course the world is full of low levels of these things, and you have an interaction with the low levels or even higher levels that you don't know of electromagnetic fields, then you can have a very profound biological effect. Instead, the standards have been developed by a group with a name ICNIRP. It stands for International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. It is a small group, a self-monitored, invitation only, reports to nobody, no industry, and has long-standing ties with industry. Next slide. Here's what we know about those wonderful ads. The child has a thinner skull. That's why when you drop them, they don't break as easily. I don't suggest anyone drop a baby. But they have smaller heads and ears. And because of that, and they have more fluid inside their brains. So there's more fluid, thinner skulls. What that translates into is a great increase in the amount that can go into their head. If you look at the image on your right and you see, follow carefully where the yellow and white is, that is the area of highest exposure. But if you look carefully, you will see that the yellow gets all the way into both eyes, and of course into that side of the cheek and the brain. When it comes to this bone marrow of the skull, which is forming, babies' brains more than double in the first year of life. The bone marrow of the skull can absorb 10 times more radiation than an adult. The eye can get 2 to 5 times more. And there's a very important part of the brain, inside in the brain, called the hippocampus. And it is critical to the development of balance, memory, impulse control, and you can get up to 30 times more exposure into the hippocampus in the young brain. So please be aware of that whenever you think about handing a phone to a young child. Next slide. This is what happens now. Tablets are designed and they're tested to be held 8 inches away from an adult male body. You can see this young man there on the left. He would not have 8 inches in his whole arm extended if he held that laptop. It would be very hard to keep it a full 8 inches away from that young boy. And when a laptop is being held and used like that, look at the exposure that gets into the frontal the front of the head, the nose, the eyes. And the eyes have no cooling mechanism. So that's of concern to us as well. Next slide. This is giving you an animation of how that radiation moves. And this is into the head, I believe, of a 6-year-old. Again, that's that same tablet. And watch as the yellow moves throughout the skull, into the eyes, the orbits, the cheek, and of course, it's affecting the hearing nerve, the eye nerve as well. So we are seeing increasing reports of problems of vision and hearing in young children. And there's an epidemic in elementary school children needing glasses. And certainly the American Ophthalmological Association has issued warnings about this problem. And we can see here why. When you look at the effect on the reproductive system, this animation, which if you click there should play, shows you something that we have modeled again. And this is work that we've done with Claudio Fernandez and Alvaro de Salas at Porto Alegre. And if you look at the image here, you'll see that the highest exposure goes into the penis and the testis when a phone is in the pocket. And keep in mind, as long as it's on, and not as long as it is on, it is sending a handshake to the tower 900 times a minute. So whether you're using it officially, whatever apps you have open that are constantly updating and chinging and friending and liking you, etc., all of those things are programmed to addict you to wanting to look right away. Oh, I got to check this. Guess what? You don't have to. And you may find your life very different if you try taking a digital Sabbath sometime. But in the meantime, be aware that the Cleveland Clinic and other experts in male fertility tell you if you want to have a healthy child, it's best to keep your cell phone as far from the testis as you can. Next slide. This is, I think, amazing to me. This is Telstra's annual report cover, right? 2018. And here you see it featuring, you see that young child on the bottom on the right, happily looking and holding a tablet. And you don't know with this particular tablet where the antennas are. Probably they could be right above her ovaries right here. Then look at the top. You see this baby. And one of the things we know about babies is that babies of parents who spend more time on their devices have delays in speech acquisition. So that babbling that your baby starts to make when they're very little, that is a way of communicating that you need to communicate back. And parents who are spending their time on their screens aren't talking to their children as much. And there's a consequence for that. Next slide. This is, to me, this is child abuse. This is child abuse. The idea that young children should be playing with these devices of virtual reality held right over their brains with radio frequency energy coming right in, and it's not ever tested. It's never been tested for its exposure into this rapidly growing brain with its thinner skull and more fluid. Next slide. These are other ways children are being targeted, and you'll see an ad with the Cookie Monster in a moment. Children are being targeted to build a dependency that starts at a very young age. Children, even younger than 2, know to smile for the camera. And by the time they're 4 or 5, they have the cell phone smile. And some children even know how to take selfies when they're very, very little. We are concerned about this in terms of child development. Basically, frankly, the development of the ability to think about others. There seems to be a deficit of empathy in the world, recently in the United States especially. And it's hard to say what explains all of it, the selfishness, the terribly tribal attitudes. But we think that a part of it certainly has to do with putting children in front of screens at too young an age. We understand these are important tools, but these are examples of some of the warnings that you get. This is the Chromebook and the iPad, and look at this and ask yourself, did you ever know that the Chromebook is supposed to be used 20 centimeters from the body, and that you're supposed to orient your iPad so that you don't have the antenna directly close to your body? Do you even know where your cellular antennas are located? Now is the time for you to ask yourself, what can you do to protect yourselves? And one thing is very simple. These devices are intended to be used off the body. So from now on, pay attention to the fact there's a reason that they are no longer marketed as laptops. They belong on tables. They are called tablets. They truly belong on tables. If you use it on a table, then you will be a foot away directly from it, and you will be protected from the radiation as best you can. And you need to know where the antennas are. In fact, there are fine print warnings that come with all of these devices that few of you have ever seen. And just as an example, these are some of the warnings that come with some Chromebooks and some iPads. And I think most of you are unaware of the fact that these devices, many of them are tested 20 centimeters away from the body. That's the test distance that it's safe. Closer than that for an adult is not acceptable. For the iPad, it meets certain guidelines, but they also tell you in the iPad to keep the cellular antenna away from your body. Most people have no idea where these antennas are. The fact of the matter is the reason why we no longer see widespread marketing of laptops, but instead of focus on tablets, is that tablets belong on tables. And we know that if you keep a device on a laptop, does not actually even belong on any human body, as I've just shown you from some of the earlier images. So please put these devices on a table, use them away from the body, and you will be safer. Next. What we see, again, you see the marketing featuring the lovely children and family, and a woman with this right over her ovaries. This is not safe. It is not smart. And we've been working with physicians around the world to promote awareness of the Baby Safe Project. More than 300 physicians have signed on to this to warn people who want to have healthy children, keep it off their bodies, and to also protect children's brains and bodies as well. Next slide. I find this just the name of the campaign. It says all that you need to know. Human ability. Well, human ability would be to take those things off your face and look somebody in the eye and maybe see it on a huge screen that you could share with people. That would be human, to interact with other people. This is now, there's no question that these devices are very valuable and extremely entertaining, but their impact on the brain and the eye has never been tested, period. So if you are into this kind of gaming device, you need to rethink the exposures, because we do not have definitive information about its safety, and we have lots of reasons to know this can be harmful. Next slide. If you're on the beach, you really need your device. I mean, you really want to be sitting on a beach watching a movie? I think it's almost impossible to make any comments about this. Next. Now, this is reality. Probably in the halls of the universities, when and if you get to go back, you will see people like this. This is a very misleading marketing here. The 100% fiber optic network. You see, I am speaking to you today with a wired Ethernet connection. It's faster, it's safer, it's more secure. They are talking about wiring into the house and then using wireless through the property, as most people do. But in fact, you can get around much of this with Ethernet cabling. And on our website at EH Trust is a lot of information about how you can wire almost any device you have, including an iPad and an iPhone. But this exposure to these young children, these cultivating, you see here, of it, your kid-ready plan for your phone-ready kid. We want children to be safe, but we don't want them to feel like at any moment they may be snatched and there's an emergency about to happen. And unfortunately, when we get very dependent on phones and are unable to let it go, we are creating and reinforcing the addictive property for ourselves and our families. Next. When Harvard University had a seminar with a number of scientists involved in this issue. The results of it were this report called Captured Agency, How the Federal Communications Commissions is Dominated by the Industry it presumably regulates. And there's literally a revolving door with the head of the FCC coming from and going back to the cell phone or telecom industry. And what was said in this report from Harvard University in 2014 was that this industry resembles big tobacco. And now you're going to see some of the way why. In the book that I wrote, Disconnect: The Truth About Cell Phone Radiation, I have copies of the memo from the cell phone industry in 1994, when the first reports came out, since corroborated that cell phone radiation could damage the DNA in the brain of rats exposed to levels of radiation that cell phones could approximate. This was 1994. This was pioneering work by Henry Lai and Vijay Singh. In the book, I discuss what happened to those scientists, to their funding. Now we have decades of research, and they have found serious effects. Government limits are outdated and don't protect people. And that is why I wrote the book. That is why we work here at Environmental Health Trust. These are detailed excerpts from the Motorola memos that I'm talking about, and the strategy that they mounted of war games. This doesn't just mean one-on-one games. This means attacking the scientists, attacking their funding, and most importantly, a media strategy that you're going to see parts of right now. This is the basis for why this media strategy will fail. I've written with my distinguished colleague, Anthony B. Miller, and with Lloyd Morgan and Iris Udison, this overview of the epidemiology. Now, for those of you who may not know, epidemiology is the study of patterns on people, from two Greek words, epi and demos, pattern of demos on the people. It studies past patterns. In other words, if we study something like brain cancer, we're basically asking what happened to you years ago to cause brain cancer. That's epidemiology. Toxicology, which I'm also an expert in, studies animals in order to predict and prevent harm in humans. And you will see here that we have both toxicology and epidemiology showing the damaging effects of cell phone radiation.